I'm going to try and read, not try, I'm going to read Essential Native Wisdom by Carol Kelly Gengi. It's my second time trying to film this. I kept getting distracted. Okay. So, this section's called Native Tradition and Belief. Out of the Indian approach to existence, there came a great freedom, an intense and absorbing love for nature, a respect for life, enriching faith in a supreme power, and principles of truth, honesty, generosity, equity, and brotherhood as a guide to mundane relations. Luther Standing Bear, Oglala, Lakota, Land of the Spotted Eagle, 1933. Our fathers gave us many laws, which they had learned from their fathers. These laws were good. They told us to treat all men as they treated us, that we should never be the first to break a bargain, that it was a disgrace to tell a lie, that we should speak only the truth, that it was a shame for one man to take from another his wife or his property without paying for it. We were taught to believe that the Great Spirit sees and hears everything, and that he never forgets, that hereafter he will give every man a spirit home according to his deserts. This I believe, and all my people believe the same. Chief Joseph Nez speech describing his tribe's history, Washington, D.C., 1879. Silence was meaningful with the Lakota, and his granting a space of silence to the speechmaker and his own moment of silence before talking was done in the practice of true politeness and regardful of the rule that thought comes before speech, and in the midst of sorrow, sickness, death, or misfortune of any kind, and in the presence of the notable and the great, silence was the mark of respect. More powerful than words was silence with the Lakota. Luther Standing Bear, Oglala, Lakota, Land of the Spotted Eagle, 1933. It is strictly believed and understood by the Sioux that a child is the greatest gift from Wakantanka in response to many devout prayers, sacrifices, and promises. Robert P. High Eagle, Hunk Papa, speaking to American anthropologist Francis Densmore, 1918. Children are not sat down and taught about what's good and what's wrong. What they see is they see their grandfathers, or they see their fathers or their mothers, their grandmothers going to ceremonies, and they say, so that must be the right thing to do. The old people do it, everybody does it, that's good, so they do it, and so they learn in the process that Thanksgiving, what is it for? Well, this one is for the maple, the chief of the trees. We're giving a Thanksgiving for the maple. Good, must respect the tree. Let's respect all the trees. So respect is learned through ceremony as a process. It's an old one, and so Thanksgiving comes as a natural way, as a being. It's part of life. It's not something that you do occasionally. It's something you do all the time. Or in Lions, interview with Bill Moyers, Listening to America, July 1991. Do not run after a boy. If a young man wants to marry you, let him come here to see you and come here to live with you. This is the reason I am always telling you to be industrious and how to live. So when you have a home of your own, you will be industrious and do right to the people around you. No Dinens Ojibwe, recounting the advice her mother gave her when she was growing up in the 19th century. Silence was meaningful with the Lakota, and his granting a space of silence to the speechmaker and his own moment of silence before talking was done in the practice of true politeness and regardful of the rule that thought comes before speech, and in the midst of sorrow, sickness, death, or misfortune of any kind, and in the presence of the notable and great, silence was the mark of respect. More powerful than words was silence with the Lakota. Luther Standing Bear, Oglala, Lakota, Land of the Spotted Eagle, 1933. I was born Lakota, and I have lived as a Lakota, and I shall die as a Lakota. Red Cloud, Oglala Sioux, Farewell Address to the Lakota People, July 1903. Very early, the Indian boy assumed the task of preserving and transmitting the legends of his ancestors and his race. Almost every evening a myth or a true story of some deed done in the past was narrated by one of the parents or grandparents, while the boy listened with parted lips and glistening eyes. On the following evening, he was usually required to repeat it. If he was not an apt scholar, he struggled long with his task, but as a rule, the Indian boy is a good listener and has a good memory, so that the stories were tolerably well mastered. The household became his audience, by which he was alternately criticized and applauded. Charles Alexander Eastman, Sante, Dakota, Indian Child Life, 1913. I have attended dinners among white people. Their ways are not our ways. We eat in silence, quietly smoking a pipe, and depart. Thus our host is honored. This is not the way of the white man. After his food has been eaten, one is expected to say foolish things, then the host feels honored. Four Guns, Oglala, Lakota, speaking to anthropologist Clark David Whistler, 1891. I was made to respect the adults, especially the aged. I was not allowed to join in their discussions or even speak in their presence unless requested to do so. Indian etiquette was very strict, and among the requirements was that of avoiding the direct address. A term of relationship or some title of courtesy was commonly used instead of the personal name by those who wished to show respect. We were taught generosity to the poor and reverence for the great mystery. Religion was the basis of all Indian training. Charles Alexander Eastman, Sante, Dakota, Indian Child Life, 1913. When a child, my mother taught me the legends of our people, taught me of the sun and sky, the moon and stars, the clouds and storms. She also taught me to kneel and pray to Usen for strength, health, wisdom, and protection. We never prayed against any person, but if we had aught against any individual, we ourselves took vengeance. We were taught that Usen does not care for the petty quarrels of men. Geronimo, Chiricahua Apache, quoted in The True Story of America's Most Ferocious Warrior, 1906. The idea of full dress in preparation for battle comes not from a belief that it will add to the fighting ability. The preparation is for death, in case that it should be the result of the conflict. Every Indian wants to look his best when he goes to meet the Great Spirit, so the dressing up is done whether an imminent danger is an oncoming battle, or sickness or injury at times of peace. Wooden Leg, Northern Cheyenne, speaking to American historian Thomas B. Markey, 1931. The traditions of our people are handed down from father to son. The chief is considered to be the most learned and the leader of the tribe. The doctor, however, is thought to have more inspiration. He is supposed to be in communion with spirits. He cures the sick by the laying on of hands and prayers and incantations and heavenly songs. He he infuses new life into the patient and performs the most wonderful feats of skill in his practice. He clothes himself in the skins of young innocent animals, such as the fawn, and he decorates himself with the plumage of harmless birds, such as the dove and the hummingbird. Sarah Winnemucca, Northern Paiute, an ethnographic sketch of the Paviotso in 1882, the Paiute's Papers on Anthropology of the Great Basin, 1882. Is there not something worthy of perpetuation in our Indian spirit of democracy, where Earth, our mother, was free to all, and no one sought to impoverish or enslave his neighbor? Charles Alexander Eastman, Sante, Dakota. The Soul of the Indian, 1911. We are always very careful when we harvest. When you take, you always give. This is about balance and equalness. We also say that when you take, you must take only what you need and leave the rest, because if you take more than you need, that means you are greedy. You have brought about imbalance. You have been selfish. To do this in our community is a very big disgrace. It is a violation of natural law, and it leaves you with no guarantee that you will be able to continue harvesting. Winona LaDuke, keynote speech at the 13th Annual E.F. Schumacher Lecture, New Haven, October 1993. To my mind, the most special tradition among the Abenaki people is the tradition of giving thanks at regular times of the year and at other times when it seems right. Thanks not just to other people, but also to those gifts of the natural world, such as our harvest of food crops, medicinal plants, good water to drink, and the rising of the sun on a new day. Joseph Brouquet, interview with Scholastic, December 2017. We believe that the Spirit pervades all creation, and that every creature possesses a soul in some degree, though not necessarily a soul conscious of itself. The tree, the waterfall, the grizzly bear, each is an embodied force, and as such an object of reverence. Charles Alexander Eastman, Sante, Dakota. The Soul of the Indian, 1911. I think I'll continue reading. I have some more time. So the next section is race and racism. Then many of the white men often abused the Indians and treated them unkindly. Many of the whites always seemed to say by their manner when they saw an Indian, "I am much better than you," and the Indians did not like this. Bikiko Ndewakanton, Dakota Sioux, from his account of the Dakota War in 1862, 1894. Sir, I shall not experience so great a change in my society as you imagine, for I find there are savages in this country also. John Norton, Mohawk, responding to a question from an Englishman about his return to, quote, savagery, 1804. I think that in virtually every sector of society, Native people, whether they're in tribal government or whether they're in private sector or an artist, they encounter people every day who have such enormously stupid, ridiculous stereotypes about Native people and have so little accurate information about either the history of Native people or their contemporary lives. Wilma Mankiller, Cherokee, interview with Mike Mitchell Martin, NPR, October 2008. Because the educational system of the dominant culture doesn't let our children know that American Indians existed in the 20th century, there's a real danger in allowing Hollywood to define us. Russell Means, interview in Entertainment Weekly, October 1992. What benefit has the Indian derived from these Wild West shows? Tribal habits and customs are apt to be degraded for show purposes, because the Indian Bureau under our government is constantly encouraging the Indian to degenerate by permitting hundreds of them to leave their homes for fraudulent savage demonstrations before the world. We see the Indian. He is pictured in the lowest degree of humanity. He is exhibited as a savage in every motion picture theater in the country. We see the Indian in his full native costume, stamped on the $5 bills as a reminder of his savagery. We see a monument of the Indian in New York Harbor as a memorial of his vanishing race. The Indian wants no such memorial monument, for he is not yet dead. Chauncey Yellow Robe, Lakota, remarks made at the 3rd Annual Conference of the Society of American Indians, Denver, 1913. In their childhoods, both my father and my grandmother had been punished for speaking Navajo in school. Navajos were told by white educators that in order to be successful, they would have to forget their language and culture and adopt American ways. They were warned that if they taught their children to speak Navajo, the children would have a harder time learning in school and would therefore be at a disadvantage. A racist attitude existed. Navajo children were told that their culture and life ways were inferior, and they were made to feel they could never be as good as white people. This pressure to assimilate, along with the physical, social, psychological, and economic destruction of the tribes following the Indian Wars of the 1800s, the poverty due to poor grazing lands and forced stock reduction, and the lack of available jobs all combined to bring the Navajo people to their knees. Lori Arvizo Alvord, The Scalpel and the Silver Bear, 1999. American history, as taught in school textbooks, pictures the development of a nation from the arrival of Columbus to the present in star-spangled language. Censorship has eliminated all malevolent and mischievous behavior from the pages of our past. The Indian is depicted as a savage and the white man as a good Samaritan. William Red Fox, Oglala Sioux, The Memoirs of Chief Red Fox, 1971. When people continue to use slurs against us and to appropriate our identities, then you have name-calling and stealing. I don't know which is worse. They are both from a racially biased, bigoted, impetuous, and origin. These images and slurs are in your face all the time, not just when there's a game. They're on the national airways, they're in the grocery stores, they're in the advertisements. It's all pervasive in general society. It's not something that just affects you if you're in certain cities, states, or schools. It's all over the place. You can't escape it. Susan Shone Harjo, quoted in The Spirit of Susan Shone Harjo, Psychology Today, November 2014. American Indians seem an enigma to most other Americans. The images portrayed in the movies, whether of noble red men or bloodthirsty savage, recall the stereotypes of Western history. Newspaper stories dealing with oil wells, uranium mines, land claims, and the occupation of public buildings and reservation hamlets almost seem to speak of another group altogether, and it is difficult to connect the two perceptions of Indians in any single and comprehensive reality. Vine Deloria, Jr., American Indians, American Justice, 1983. There's a real invisibility when it comes to Indian people. We don't show up in the media. We don't show up in textbooks. We don't show up in everyday conversation. Folks don't know Indians or anything about Indians. Michael E. Roberts, quoted in Native Americans are recasting views of Indigenous life. National Geographic, December 2018. Life was not easy growing up on the reservation. There was racism, prejudice, and stereotyping of our native people. Growing up as a light-skinned blonde, I was not a direct recipient of that bad behavior, but my family was. During the 1980s, there were many violent clashes over the issue of Ojibwe spirit fishing. I personally witnessed rock throwing, name-calling, and fighting. Sometimes hundreds of white protesters showed up at the boat landings as fishermen prepared to spearfish. It pained me to see this. I could not understand why there was such a misunderstanding over our rights. I could not understand why there was so much hatred. Jordan Matthews, Remarks on Veterans Day, November 2019. If we built a racist society, what would it look like? Who would be incarcerated? Who would be the dropouts? Who would have the highest suicide rates? Who would have the highest rate of parental termination? Whose language would be disappearing? Who would be sick from addiction and tuberculosis and diabetes? If we built a racist culture, that's what it would look like, and that's what it looks like. Ernestine Hayes, Conversation with Scholar Lance Twitchell, recorded by the Organization of StoryCorps, 2016. So I'll stop there for today. I'll continue reading America and Patriotism and Politics next time I read this book. So, hope you enjoyed that, and hope it helped you fall asleep a little bit. Thank you for subscribing.